Your attention, I'd like to start. Good evening. I'm Ahmed Benchemsi, the director of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, and it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ahmed Benchemsi. Ahmed is currently a visiting scholar at Stanford University's program on Arab reform and democracy at the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. His research under the heading of the Seeds of Secularism in the Post-Spring Arab World focuses on the grassroots democratic movements in Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt, and examines the prospects for genuine democratic reform in these various contexts. Before joining Stanford, Ahmed was publisher and editor of Morocco's two best-selling news weeklies, the French language TelQuel and the Arabic language Nishan, which he founded in 2001 and 2006, respectively. He was twice awarded Best Investigative Journalist in the Arab World by the European Union in 2004 and 2007. He was also keynote speaker for the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism Network in Amman, Jordan in 2009 and 2011, and for the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2011 and 2012. Ahmed received his Master of Philosophy in Political Science in 1998 from Paris's Institut d'études politiques, and his Master of Arts in Development Economics in 1995 from the Sorbonne. Here in the US, Ahmed has been recognized by fellowships with Newsweek in 2005-2008 and the Los Angeles Times in 2005. He was twice invited by the US State Department as an international guest. He has also been a guest speaker for several think tanks and universities throughout the country, including Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, Tufts, Brown, and now you can add Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. His talk today is entitled Islamism versus Secularism, the Arab Spring Phase 2, and proposes to examine the factors underlying the Islamist movement's electoral advances and their implications for secularist trends in Arab societies. And I want to thank Ahmed for accepting our invitation to be with us today. I want to thank you all for attending, and we'll ask you to please join me in giving Ahmed Benchemsi a warm welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this generous introduction, Professor. I am humbled and honored to be here, deeply honored to be here in this beautiful room, in this beautiful university. And I thank you very much for your invitation. Before I start, I want to say that I'm a journalist, as you understood, so this lecture considered as the point of view of someone, of a practitioner, someone who's been working on the field rather than an academic. With all due respect to academia, of course, but this is the point of view of someone who experienced Arab societies through underground work rather than academic research. Okay, and I want to start by an anecdote. Also, I don't know if any of you Googled me or saw a video on YouTube, but to those of you who did that, I apologize in advance because some of the jokes I'm going to use tonight, I already did them on the video. I hope you didn't see it. Okay, so journalism. Let's start by an anecdote, something that happened to me as a journalist in Morocco. It was in 2005. It was right after the terrorist attacks that happened in London. So I was in my office in Casablanca, in Morocco, and I received a phone call. And there was a French TV producer who wanted to invite me to a show on the TV channel Arte. Some of you might have heard about it. And the idea was to, he told me that there was a lot of talk in the media about how linking Islam to terrorism and making this confusion that basically Islam is a religion of violence, etc. And he told me, well, you know better, we know better, and we would like to do this show to show to the Western audience, to the French and the German audience, that Islam is not a religion of terror, that is, it's fact and a religion of peace and enlightenment and tolerance. And we checked out your magazines. We see that you're quite a progressive journalist, so we would like you to come to our show so you can tell our viewers that Islam is a religion of tolerance and peace rather than a religion of violence. And I said, well, thank you first for inviting me to your show. As for Islam being a religion of peace rather than violence, honestly, I don't know. I mean, after all, Bin Laden is using verses from the Quran, isn't he? He didn't make them up. But on the other hand, I said, there's this Algerian author called Malik Chebet, who wrote a book called The Islamic Anthology of Wine, and another one called The Islamic Kama Sutra. And he also quotes the Quran. So I guess it's all a matter of perspective, right? Both of them are using arguments that directly derived from religion, but I guess not exactly the same arguments. My point is, I told to this French person on the phone that religion is neither violence or tolerance or this or that. It's whatever you want it to be. It just depends on the verses you pick. And by the way, this debate about religion being this or that is a never-ending debate. It was open since the very concept of religion was invented, and it will never stop. So if I come to your show, it will be to speak about that, to speak about the right to not be defined by religion, but by anything else. And then this guy was confused on the phone, and he told me, but I'm confused. Aren't you a Muslim? And I said, okay. I asked him, I said, what's your name? He said, my name is Paul. I said, okay, Paul, are you a Christian? And he was like, yes, no, I mean, sure, well, my parents used to take me to church when I was a kid, but that's a long time ago, and I said, I'm French, you know, I don't really care about these things. I said, exactly. And he said, it's a personal choice, I don't care. I said, exactly, it's a personal choice, Paul. So why do you assume that I don't make personal choices too? Just because my name is Ahmed and your name is Paul? Basically, what Paul gave me the choice of either identifying to this brand of Islam, or to this one, which is like nicer, like much cuter. So basically, he gave me the choice of being either a good Muslim or a bad Muslim. And but what if I wanted to identify neither to this one or to this other one? What if I wanted to identify to this, for example? This is a picture that's been taken in a Moroccan town called Souera. And once a year, there's a great festival there. It's called the Arab World's Woodstock. And all these people are Muslim here. So and they during 5 days they gather and they dance and they have fun and they smoke a lot. And I can tell you that 500,000 people coming from all around Morocco on the Arab world, and I can tell you that really religion is the last thing on their mind. So, but Paul was not allowing me to identify to anything even close to this. He was basically depriving me from this choice. I was either this or that, but not this. He didn't even imagine that I could not identify as either a good or a bad Muslim. So I told him, Paul, please, what you're doing is wrong. I mean, you're just putting a tag on my forehead and on the foreheads of millions of people without even asking them. And by doing so, you are depriving them from what you consider is your right, which is freedom of choice and freedom of belief, and which is a human right. And human rights are universal, as the title says, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's not a Western declaration, it's universal. And I, Ahmed, I'm a part of the universe, mind you. So please, allow me the right to come to your show and to say this type of things. And then Paul was silent on the phone. And I said, hello. I had to say, hello, are you still here? And he was like, yes, I'm still here. It's not exactly what I was thinking about. So, you want me to call you back? And he never called me back. Because I didn't fit in his like essentialist vision of what an Arab person should be. So, okay, fast forward to the Arab Spring. That was in 2005. Now fast forward to 2011, when all these revolts happened. Were those claims about freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of choice, were those claimed freedom of expression as well, individual freedoms, were those claims raised by the protesters in the streets? Not really. I mean, the claims that were raised mainly were democracy and the end of corruption and of authoritarianism. It's not that the kids who started the whole thing on Facebook and Twitter and social media were not fully endorsing human rights, including individual freedoms. No, they are very much secular. It's just, and I asked this question, that's basically what I've been doing in Stanford, like digging and talking to activists all over the Arab world, and I've been asking this question systematically. Why didn't you raise these concerns too, this type of concerns to individual freedoms? And I've been receiving the same answer from all throughout the Arab world. Same thing. Like, the idea was basically, it's not time to do that. Like, these topics are divisive. Let's just for now claim democracy, claim the end of dictatorships, the accountability of those in charge, the end of corruption, because these are federative topics. And those other topics that you're talking about, it's not that they're not important. They are, but we'll see it later. Let's just down with the dictatorship first. And then we need to gather to bring the bad guy down. And then after that, the time will come to raise these topics. So that talk, I've been receiving it in 2011, while the Arab Spring was unfolding. So fast forward again, 2 years later, we're 2013, where these ideas, this agenda advanced in any way? Not exactly. Not only it was not advanced, but what we see happening is pretty much the same pattern everywhere around the Arab world, is that, well, the situation differs from one country to another. Tunisia is not Egypt, which is not Libya, which is not all the countries where revolutions succeeded, but basically the global pattern is that Islamists are cycling the line for power after autocrats. That's what we broadly see everywhere. How come? So the question is very simple. How come those who triggered those revolts, this young and bright generation, didn't prevail? How come they didn't push their ideas of a more secular and open Arab world? How come they didn't prevail, since they are the ones who triggered revolutions in the first place? I mean, and I'm saying just triggered. I mean, of course, I'm not condoning the idea that this was all Facebook revolutions or Twitter. I don't buy these things. But Facebook and Twitter were very instrumental in starting this thing and in conveying the message and conveying and in branding the slogans and in a creative way and all that. But of course, the street mobilization happened because there were structured organizations on the ground that helped mobilize the people. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood joined in later, but they joined anyway. But from soccer fans as well in Egypt and various and labor unions in Tunisia, etc. Various groups helped build the momentum on the ground. But still, we have to acknowledge that the spark came from a new generation that was pretty much secular. So how come this generation was so easily overplayed by religious fundamentalists? Well, I think there are two main reasons for that. First reason is organization. The political Islam has an organization. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is the mother organization. We can consider it legitimately as the mother organization of political Islamic groups, even though, I mean, of course, there are more nuances to that. But broadly, we can consider that the serious and consistent grassroots work on the ground, addressing the needs of the poor populations, providing social services, building solidarity networks. Members of Islamist organizations donate shares of their income every month to the mother organization. So at the end of the day, you end up with very strong, rich, well-organized and well-endowed grassroots organization. So that's the number one reason why Islamists prevailed. It's because they were prepared. It's because they had something structured that the secularists didn't have. And the secularists, they had Twitter, which is nice, but I mean, there's no way that it replaces a grassroots organization. I mean, Twitter and Facebook are communication tools. They are not a grassroots organization. So it's nice to boost the momentum, but it's definitely not enough to mobilize populations. And when you get to a vote, well, then obviously you need structure on the ground to mobilize people. Islamists have that, secularists definitely didn't have that. So I said two things. First thing is the organization. That's what Islamists had and secularists don't have in the Arab world. But of course it's not enough. I mean, if doing social work was enough to build constituencies, I guess, humanitarian workers would rule the world or something. So it also takes something else, and that's the second reason, that's the second thing that Islamists have and secularists don't have, is a doctrine. It's written right there on the slogan, on the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Quran Dusturana wa Jihad Sabiluna. The Quran is our constitution, and activism is our path. Religious activism is our path. So it's right there, and it's a doctrine that is solid. I mean, we could consider it as insufficient and sometimes populist, because you cannot solve everything with religious findings. I mean, you have to find a solution for, I don't know, unemployment, inflation, things like that. I'm not sure there's a recipe for everything in the Quran, but still, it's on the communication level, it speaks to the, we could fairly consider that such slogans and this doctrine, which is basically al-Islam huwa al-hal, Islam is the solution, that's the motto of the Muslim Brotherhood, we can consider that somehow it speaks to the unconscious of the broad and larger masses. So that's the doctrine of the Muslim Brotherhood. They have an organization, and they have a set of ideas in the form of a strong, solid, and consistent doctrine. On the other hand, the secular, they have like social media, but they don't have a doctrine. And actually, you know what? They do have a doctrine. It's called democracy. But the only thing, and democracy, and there is a common ground between Islamists and secularists. It's all what's about democracy, free vote, electing the leaders of the nation, taking them accountable by an independent judiciary, a free press, a separation of powers. Islamists and secularists wouldn't disagree on all these things. Where the line has to be drawn is that beyond a voting mechanism and a technical distribution of powers, of the mechanisms of power, democracy is also about, it's also a philosophy derived from basically the findings of the Enlightenment age in Europe in past centuries. It's broadly the prevalence of reason, rationality, tolerance over irrationality, religious passion, and sectarianism. This is where the line is drawn between Islamists and secularists. And ultimately, these concepts evolved in the 20th century in something that is called human rights, including individual freedoms. And individual freedoms include gender equality, include freedoms of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, the freedom to dispose of your body, sexual freedoms, all type of freedoms. This is where the line is drawn. This is what Islamists would not agree on. The secular doctrine, if it had to be found, would be democracy, but not just as a voting mechanism, as the Islamists say, but also including individual freedoms, also including individual liberties, and building the conscience of an individual rather than someone who belongs to a group, a religious group. Why don't the secularists claim this type of ideas in the Arab world? We can observe that pretty much everywhere in the Arab world, secular activists are pretty, or it's starting slightly to change right now, but global pattern was a certain, and excuse me for using a term that is not really academic, but they're kind of shy. Because Arab secularists, and this comes from a long time ago, they have this embedded, self-fulfilling sense that they are doomed to fail. That these kind of ideas, individual freedoms, freedom of thought, sexual freedoms, gay rights, stuff like that, will always remain the preserve of educated, westernized elites. And that convincing the deep country and the people of these things is mission impossible because we live in deep Islamic societies. That's the sense that even Arab seculars, they have this ingrained sense of failure that we won't succeed because this is the true people. Like the people are religious by nature. How can we push such ideas? So my personal theory is that they're wrong. And is that the societies are not really Islamic in the Arab world. I'm not talking about religious minorities, I'm not talking about Christians and Jews. I'm talking about people who are deemed to be Muslim. So my personal theory is basically that Muslims are not Muslims. Look like shades of grey, X-Files and stuff. Now, seriously, let me explain what it means. And to explain that, I will talk about myself. Like, I'm a Moroccan citizen from a country that is Islamic by the constitution. And 99.9% of Moroccans are supposedly Muslims under the law and under the constitution. So being a Muslim, I will tell you what it means for me, technically, as a Moroccan citizen. It's, for example, if I want to eat a sandwich by daylight during Ramadan, technically, penal code, I go to jail for 6 months if I do that in the street, in the open. Well, the law varies from one country to another, but I guess if you do that in like Saudi Arabia, you're definitely not safe. And well, pretty much the same pattern. And I just recently discovered that was not the case for Egypt, but there are other type of constraining laws in Egypt. Anyway, if I eat a sandwich in the street by daytime during Ramadan, 6 months in prison as a Moroccan. So it's forbidden because I'm a Muslim and the law enforces Islam on me. If like sexual relations, if I have sexual relations with with someone who's not my wife, and my wife, because religious marriage is the only form of marriage in Morocco. There's no civil marriage. So if I caught having a sexual relationship with a woman that I'm not religiously married to, 6 months in jail. Same thing. Not even talking about homosexual sex, of course. No way that it's legal. So I guess it's 6 months in jail as well. If I want like to drown my sorrow in booze because of all these restrictions, I technically can't. Not that alcohol is not sold in Morocco. Like in Libya, it's forbidden, and many of the Gulf countries it's officially forbidden. In Morocco, it's sold, but it is meant to be sold to foreigners visiting the country. That's what's officially meant. So if I walk in a bar and I drink and I order a glass of wine, I and the bartender go to jail. What if I say that, you know what, I have nothing against Islam, it's just that all these constraints, I just can't take that. So I want to change religion. I want to be a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist for that matter. It's all forbidden. 6 months to 2 years in jail for a penal offense called Za'za'at Aqidat Muslim, shaking the Muslim's faith. If I ever say out loud that I'm not really convinced by religious principles, and you know what, let's just talk about it. Basically, if I just raise doubts publicly, Za'za'at Aqidat Muslim, 6 months to 2 years in prison. So doubting is forbidden. This is what it means technically for me to be a Muslim in my own country. So this is the law, right? That is derived from the Constitution. Now let me tell you about real life. In real life, there is about 100 times more bottles of alcohol sold in the country every day than there are of foreign tourists. Moroccans not only drink wine, but Morocco is a wine producer. And so is Algeria, and so is Tunisia, and so is Syria, Libya, and Jordan, Lebanon, Jordan, maybe Egypt, not sure, Egypt too. So tell me about Muslims not drinking wine. Obviously we do. So real life, that's what happens. Well, about sex, I'll just give you a number. I mean, people are not getting the idea of getting married. Not against this idea in Europe. Well, except marriage is a serious commitment, you know. You cannot get married if you don't have a job, if you don't have an income, if you can't sustain a household. The economic situation being what it is, and the unemployment rate being what it is, the average age, last time I checked, for marriage in the Arab world was 31 years for men and 27 years for women. You might challenge these numbers if you have more recent figures, but I guess probably it's around this. So just think about it. Do you really think that people in the Arab world don't have sex before the age of 31? And 27 for women? I mean, we're made of flesh and blood, just like anyone else. So, basically, people violate the law all the time. That's what happens, like homosexuals. They obviously exist in the Arab world as they exist anywhere else. Except in Iran, apparently. That's what President Ahmed Benchemsi said in Colombia when he gave a talk there recently. And eating during the daytime, or just doubting and having like iconoclastic religious feelings. Just think about it. Why on earth would the Arabs be some kind of like Orwellian robots who don't doubt? We do, like anyone else. What happens, in fact, is that all these laws that make us Muslims, legally speaking, are just violated tens of millions of times a day, everywhere in the Arab world. So, to the knowledge of the authorities, of course, who cannot enforce the law because it's just impossible, because they would put half the population in jail, if not 3/4 of the population. So, the bottom line is that Islam is not the #1 paradigm defining Arab societies. Delusion is, or hypocrisy, or some form of schizophrenia. It came to a point, delusional and hypocrite attitude, it came to a point where we tend to believe that it's our traditions. Let me give you an example. In Morocco, a Moroccan woman technically a Muslim, cannot marry a foreigner who is not deemed a Muslim. Like, an American citizen who would be called William and blonde, blue eyes. He would not be able to marry a Moroccan Fatima or Khadija unless he converts to Islam. And there's this little Moroccan kick, he has to change his name as well. That's the law. He has to change his name before a religious clerk. So this happens all the time. It happened in my own family. The man would come to the woman's family and say, I mean, this is ridiculous. Why should I change my name? It's not about religion, it's about love. I love Khadija. I want to marry her. It has nothing to do with religion. And then the family would systematically answer, it's okay, listen, just when the day of the marriage, when the religious clerk asks you what's your name, just tell him your name is Muhammad and you'll be fine. And it's okay. Just the day after you wake up as William again and everything is fine and no one will ever ask you anything. It's just an innocent tradition. It's okay, it's fine. But think about it. When did it become a tradition to lie to the government? Because that's what we do, basically. All the time. On lots and plenty of different matters that touch upon basic individual freedoms. Thinking, drinking beer, having sexual relationships, exercising whatever personal freedom. Our societies somehow became based on lying and cheating. And I'm not saying everyone, of course, does, because there are people who genuinely are religious persons, and of course I'm not dismissing this as an important and relevant part of the society. But still, it's a part of the society, and there are other parts. And societies in the Arab world are as diverse as anywhere else. So all the people who do not conform to the laws are technically outlaws, and these are societies that are psychologically completely crippled because they function on a fundamental lie, which is the fact that it's okay to enforce a belief. You cannot enforce a belief, legally speaking. You can enforce hypocrisy, you can enforce lies, but you cannot enforce a belief. So and this creates a long string of psychological disorders and many side effects. I mean, we could talk about hours. You could talk during hours about that. I will just name one side effect. It's the feeling of guilt. Since everyone is, or almost everyone, a lot of people are violating the law and a double law, the religious and the earthly law, all the time. Well, then people feel guilty all the time. And you know what? This is the number one lever used by Islamists to recruit people. You feel guilty? You're right. So let me teach you what your real life should be. So playing on the feeling of guilt is one of the psychological levers that are mainly used by Islamists. There are other levers, of course, economical and social levers. But this is a fundamental lever that we should not disregard to recruit people. So how do we address that? And again, I'm a journalist and I'm talking from a journalistic perspective. I'm not theorizing anything. I'm talking about on the ground. So I was a journalist in Morocco, and I was the editor and publisher of two magazines, TelQuel and Nishan, and of course we defended democracy and we spoke about corruption, rigging elections, the king's wealth, things like that. But we also addressed these kind of divisive topics. So I published stories on religious practices, what kind of Muslims are we, why Moroccans are complex, this guilt, this written guilt. We spoke to psychologists, psychiatrists, trying to understand how it works. Blood schizophrenic, like the cartoon there shows, like there are two individuals in the head of each one fighting all the time. The traditionalist one and the modern one, and they're fighting and they're hiding because the law is against it. I mean, it's a completely messed up situation. You have no idea. Moroccans and sex, because they do, actually, as anyone else. But then, since it is done as a matter of breaking the law, then this affects the nature and the type of sexual relationships that happen in the Arab world. And I can't even start to tell you how complicated it is psychologically to overcome all these things. Homosexuals obviously exist in the Arab world. This young man here on this cover, his name is Abdullah Taya. He's a Moroccan writer, and to my knowledge, he's the only public person who made his coming out as a homosexual. And I'm very proud to tell you that this happened on my magazine. Didn't hear about someone who did that after. Since then he became an icon for individual freedoms in the Arab world. This last cover story is
This is Moroccan. How would you say this? Two Moroccans that I love it.
The tricks, the girls' tricks. Basically, it was an investigation, a social thing on how young girls just live their life. And just the cartoon is pretty self-explanatory, right? You see like the mask of modesty, and then you have a young girl who wants to live her life.
Manipulative girl.
Excuse me?
Manipulative girl.
Yeah, but in a nice way. I mean, I obviously not condemning this kind of things. This is survival strategies, obviously. So, of course, Islamists and attacked us immediately on the ground that we were conveying westernized values and westernized ideas, that we were evil, western-minded secularists, and that nothing of this is true to our true self, etc. And what I answered is that no, actually we're not throwing theories around. This is the Moroccan society. We're not making anything up. We're just doing our job as journalists. So this is secularism, but it's not a secularism that is some Western-inspired theory that we're importing and enforcing on people. It's what we call secularism from within. It's the reality on the ground. It doesn't have this name, and it's practiced in a very twisted way, but it's still individual freedoms that are practiced, accept it or not. And this is valid throughout the Arab world. So what we said is that we are not making up theories. We are our editorials, they come out of our field reporting, not the other way around. So we're not making theory out of practice, nor are we trying to subject practice to theory. We're just seeing what happens on the ground and giving it a name. And then the second layer of attacks was that, okay, well, you know what, these ideas of yours, you can continue saying that you will never reach more than a tiny fraction of the population, like the westernized elite who will believe you and follow you in this theory. So, well, too bad for them. These two magazines became #1 in the country, and we got to a point where we peaked at 500,000 readers a week, and we outranked our competitors like 2 or 3 fold. This says something. It says that when you defend this type of speech in an Arab country, you find the public. It's because stifled by hypocrisy as they are, people are ready to cheerfully embrace whomever tells them it's just okay to be yourselves. And the debates that we opened back then about secularism, individual freedoms, belief, conscience, etc., when we did all these things, it was very original at that time, but since then I'm very proud to say that this became mainstream debates in the Arab world. And I am deeply convinced that what worked in Morocco would work everywhere else in the Arab world. And we see that even more clearly in countries where revolutions succeed. Like in Egypt now, it's extremely visible that the only relevant societal debate is between Islamists and secularists. They agree on voting mechanisms and transparency, the needed transparency, and I'm not even sure they would enforce that, by the way, still on the talking level, and fight against corruption and all that. But then, when it comes to individual freedoms, that is where the fight is happening. And it's a relevant fight. And it's a fight that, for me, is the defining fight of what the Arab societies, the post-revolutionary Arab societies, will become. Or not become. It's during the dictatorship eras, there was a so-called consensus, which was basically what the dictators promoted just to keep everyone quiet. But it was a false consensus. Democracy is also about confronting ideas, about debating, and this is the one relevant fault line in contemporary Arab societies: Islamism and secularism. We can give it other names. But basically, it's the right to exert your individual freedoms versus the assumption that we are defined by our religious heritage. So let me recap before I end. Secularism from within. I think that this is the missing link for Arab seculars. So what they need is, #1, a grassroots organization. Of course, that's the first thing they need before preaching any type of ideas like that. Seculars in the Arab world need to build a grassroots organization to cater efficiently to the populations, to build a solid link with grassroots, build grassroots movements, and to be able to mobilize the people.
But they also need to wrap that up in a consistent secular doctrine, one that would insist not only on the mechanisms of democracy, the mechanisms of sharing of power, transparency, accountability, but also on the spirit of democracy, which is individual freedoms. This politically translates to programs, it should translate to programs that feature alongside democratic values like free elections, etc., basically the separation of mosque and state. That's what I technically meant by secularism in the Arab world. It's stripping all the legislation and the constitutional design of Arab countries from whatever religious reference. That is the relevant debate. It's not happening right now, obviously not. But this is the relevant debate. That's what is going on. And you know what? This claim, the secular claim in the Arab world, it would be, if it is pushed seriously one day, it would be easier than you think, because secularism can be claimed and should be claimed not as an ideology that is important from anywhere else in the Arab world, but only as something that will reveal the true nature of the people. So basically, claiming secularism in the Arab world must be done in the name of social authenticity. Take that, Islamists. Not only is it not foreign values, but it's what the society is already. Aside from theories, aside from what the people are supposed to be, it's what the people are. Except offering this doctrinal setting consists in telling the people, you know what, it's okay to be what you are. It's fine. Don't feel guilty about it. This is called individual freedoms, it's called human rights, it's universal, and you are entitled. I think, of course, it's pretty provocative paradigm given the situation at hand. And what's at stake here, I believe, is basically to move from irrationality to rationality. From a society governed by belief, which is intrinsically irrational. With all due respect to belief, of course, but I mean, positive law has to be based, and that's the activist in me talking now, not anymore the journalist. Has to be based on rational things. What's at stake again is moving from irrationality to rationality, and this is, I believe, the indispensable condition to access modernity. It's the only way, and there's no reason why the Arab world should be essentially immune to that. No reason. We'll get there. Sooner or later. I believe the sooner the better. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Ahmed. I will open the floor now to questions. I will ask you maybe to field the questions. I will only ask you to identify yourselves first, if you don't mind. Thank you.
My name is Ruth Kay. I'm an anthropologist. I spent some time in Morocco. It's a beautiful country. 500,000 subscriptions to your journal.
No subscriptions, readers.
Okay, but there are a lot more people in Morocco than that. So, like, one, can you tell us any country in the Islamic world that has made a start in this direction of secularists starting to build grassroots organizations, trying to win acceptance to this really, although you say that people are practicing one life, but up here, they're saying I'm really, something else. How do you see this coming about?
Honestly, I'm not seeing it coming about. I want to see it come about, but I'm not really seeing it come about. What I see is that there is a collection of individuals who promote these values.
Yes.
Many online, by the way. But they are out there. It's just that they are not, I don't see them organizing any relevant type of grassroots organization, not for now. I'm just saying that they are out there.
Yes.
And by the way, I'm apologizing in advance for this shameful instance of self-promotion, but we created a website called Free Arabs, and some of our contributors are here around this table. I don't know. And basically the point is to bring together all the people who defend this type of ideas. And I can tell you that there are thousands of us out there just popping up on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, and these are relevant trends, sociologically speaking, nowadays. So no organization for now. It didn't start yet, but I am deeply convinced that it has to start, and it will start sooner or later. And this website, freearabs.com, is not only meant to bring out those people.
I wish you well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes.
Rochelle Davis, I'm a professor here in the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies.
Okay.
Ahmed, thank you for this interesting and provocative and thought-provoking talk. I'm going to push you to kind of think about a few more things, because I see a sort of a gap there, and I want to see if I missed it or if you can sort of fill this gap. So
Okay.
forgive me for kind of reciting a bit back
No problem.
to you what you said. But this idea of sort of individual freedoms grows out of this Enlightenment tradition, which in the West we've had hundreds of years to sort of work with and deal with. And you're also saying that people in the Arab world should embrace it in some ways, this idea of individual freedoms, and push that, etc. Which I think in some ways what you're trying to say is the world is better through embracing diversity and openness and freedom, right? Which is great. I have no problem with that.
Not just saying that. I'm saying that that's already the word that we have in the Arab world. It's just that embracing those values will consist in allowing people to be themselves without breaking the law, and without feeling guilty because they are doing something that they should not be doing by the law and by the constitution and by the religion and etc. It's relieving social pressure from a pre-existing social situation. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. And then the Islamists, I think, what you're also saying is that they are arguing against that because they see the world will be better through conforming to their view, their worldview, and that secularism and these ideas are a Western imposition, whether people are practicing it or not. I mean, I don't think they necessarily care whether that reflects the social reality on the ground that you're talking about. They're saying we have this vision and we want this.
Yes.
So the gap that I want to ask you about is, how do you convince that group,
Who, the Islamists?
the Islamists?
That's not my concern. Seriously. The idea is that the divide between conservatives and progressive is something that is universal. It takes different modalities from one society to another, and from one religion to another, and from one cultural heritage to another. But I believe that that's basically how it is meant to be. There will always be a divide between conservatives and progressives, and you can throw whatever name you want on that depending on the society. My point is that the other side, the liberal, secular, progressive, call it whatever you want, has to organize. It has to be, to stand up to the other side. Because the first side, the conservative one, which in the Arab world happens to be the Islamists, they are solid and consistent, and the point is not to convince them. The point is to build an alternative, and then to let the social and political debate unfold freely as it should in any democratic country, and we'll see who will win. And the basic democratic mechanisms will be followed and will give birth to a new situation. That's what I'm saying. The point is not to convince the conservatives, the point is to empower the liberals. So there are two alternatives, and then the real democratic debate can start at last. That's what I'm saying. Please, Professor Peter.
Should I feel?
Excuse me? Yeah, just
You call as you want me to do that?
Okay.
Thank you. Judith Tucker, I'm also on the faculty here in History and Arab Studies, and thank you very much for your talk. Maybe following up a little bit more kind of on Rochelle's question, but historicizing it a bit. So, I mean, isn't one of the issues here that we have a historical context that we're dealing with? And, you know, most of the region had an experience of colonialism, of imperialism, of European pressures of various kinds, and that a lot of the discourse, secularist discourse, and certainly the international human rights discourse is very tainted, shall we say, to a certain extent by that history, and was freely used, as you're well aware, by colonial powers as part of the rationale for their sort of making free with that part of the world, with its population. So, I mean, this is a lot of heavy lifting, it seems to me, when you're trying to address this issue today. And I take your point that if I understand your argument correctly, what you're doing is saying, look at the society, just sociologically speaking, we are a society that values individual freedoms and that would like to be...
Practices them, not values them, that's the point.
Practices them, right. But that could be translated into a value, right. And so, I mean, it's hard, right? I mean,
I'm not saying...
How do you...
I'm not saying it's easy. I understand your question. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying that Islamic and traditional values don't have, number one, merit, number two, validity, number three, historical roots. And one of these roots is the anti-colonial struggle that deems these anti-Western values the most relevant ones to define ourselves in some way that is consistent with our history, etc. But two things. Number one, history is not the only paradigm defining people. I mean, you can have a history and still free yourself from it. It's not because you have a historical heritage that you should be stuck in it all the time. That's the first thing. And so I'm starting by a description of the current society. It makes it more complicated. The layer of what you're saying adds another layer of complexity to the situation, but it changes nothing to what the society is. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we might want to examine history a little closer. Yes, there is the colonial history, but there is also the unwritten history of our own societies. As you know very well, history is written by the winners. And the winners are those who closed the doors of ijtihad a long time ago, and who showed Islam as a religion that is totally closed and immune to any innovation, because كل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. I don't know how to translate it. Like any innovation is a bad thing, and it will lead you to hell. This is one side of Islam, and this is the dominant explanation that was given by the Islamic and religious trends that historically prevailed. But if you dig further, you will find out Ash'ariya, you will find out Ibn Rushd, you will find out Abu Nuwas, you will find out a lot of Omar Khayyam, who not only was an extremely liberal thinker, but who was at that time someone who was favored by the caliphs and the political powers of that time, and they were sponsoring him to diffuse his ideas to the elite because mass media didn't exist yet. But my point is that there is more to it than what we see of Islamic history. Malik Shabal, when he writes the Islamic Kama Sutra, he quotes writers from the Nifzawi, or that's the 16th century, if I'm not mistaken. And he quotes Omar Khayyam as well, and the culture of wine in Baghdad under the caliphs, under the greatest caliphs of Islamic time, by the way. Ibn Rushd, he developed a whole set of philosophy of Islam that shows it in a totally different way. So, number one, taking into account this is the reality of what we live in, which a lot of theologians don't do. Either they are from the right or the left. And number two, rethinking history. Because history is not just about a religious paradigm that is close to individual values and individual freedoms. Not at all. There are lots of fantastic things to uncover. I don't want to talk about this site anymore, because I'm not here for that. But there is a great story that was uploaded right today about it's called Sudan's Gandhi and the Mecca verses. And it's the story of a great intellectual, Sudanese intellectual called Mahmoud Taha, and who explained the distinction in the Quran between the Mecca verses and the Medina verses. And he basically, I won't go too deep in the details, but he had a very liberal reading and understanding of Islam, and he was so threatening to the authorities of Sudan, who happened to be Islamists, that they hanged him. And not only did they hang him, but they buried him in an unknown location. to avoid the threat that anyone goes on his grave and mourns him like someone who's really an inspiration. And this person is definitely not a Western-minded secular UP or anything. He's a religious scholar who just happened to give a religious reading that is challenging the main paradigm, which is the one of political Islam, basically. And political Islam has been on since the Umayyads. The form just changes, but it's still the same idea, which consists in using religion as a tool for political power. Yes.
My name is Nina Navar. I'm a student at Career. I'm actually going to be spending the summer in Morocco, so I'll be very interested to see everything you talked about presently unfolding on the ground.
If you're there in June, go to a Sawira festival.
You know, I will be there in June, and I
Enjoy!
Yeah. I was just wondering what you think of some of the groups that might be located in a kind of gray zone between the two poles that you articulate. For example, I've done some reading about Islamic feminist groups who articulate personal freedom and sort of feminism and women's sort of special role within society, not from a liberal lens, but from an Islamic lens. And also maybe more broadly, what some people seem to articulate, again, a kind of theoretician, as a generational divide. I mean, Ahmed Benchemsi talks about the post-Islamist era and the new generation of Islamists who are redefining the relationship between individual freedom and religion. And so I guess it's two quite, well, I keep sort of all of these theories about it. But I guess my first question for you is those sort of specifically those groups like Muslim feminists, do you think that they have, what role do they play in this kind of
I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. I mean, Muslim feminists. Not sure. I mean, listen. Secularism doesn't consist in throwing what's the expression? The baby into bathwater. It includes a certain understanding of religion. That's an angle from which you can push this narrative, like what Mohammed Mahmoud is doing, and what I guess these persons you're talking about are also doing. Like, is feminism from an Islamic angle? Sure, why not? I mean, let's go for it. If it works, why not? And there is no such thing as two groups that are totally distinct and exclusive to one another and watching each other and ready to engage with violence. It's a society. It's complicated. It's like the right and the left over here. You got people jumping in and off, Republican and Democrat, because on some issues they would be. And you got Democrats, Republicans who support abortion, and then you have Democrats who are heavy on gun rights, etc. So of course there are a lot of people in between, and this schizophrenia paradigm doesn't help because it makes the situation even more complex. So it's nothing linear. Was it linear in English? It's not linear. It's not a clear and straight path. It's just a situation that is complex and that needs to go through more clarity. And I think it will go through more clarity if there are two sides that are clearly defined. The Islamist side is clearly defined. The secular side needs to be clearly defined, and there is ground for it. And there are ways to do that. And it's not a helpless cause, as many believe. That's all I'm saying. It's the feminist Islamist, Muslim feminists, or whatever. I'm sure they have a role to play in this. I'm not sure what they do exactly, but sure, why not?
Yes, Suleyma Hadawi, visiting researcher at Georgetown. I wanted to ask you two questions.
Right.
One that has to deal with the role that the king plays in Morocco, because we have Arab secularists, but Moroccans have to deal with the specificity due to the role of the king as a commander of the faithful. And I feel that there is this big elephant in the room that Moroccan secularists don't address, and I would like your take on that. And the second was about this recent fatwa issued in Morocco by the ulema, which is the official organization of Morocco.
Just yesterday.
Yeah, and calling for death penalty to apostates. So that is
Okay, well, I'm not sure the position of Morocco's king as Amir al-Mu'mineen, commander of the faithful, is really relevant in this discussion. Because he's using religion basically as a tool to legitimize his political power, and that's nothing new. Sultans have been doing that in the past. Again, since the Umayyads, this has been a recurrent pattern all over the Arab world, and Imam al-Mu'mineen in Morocco is just the local form, or most recent one. That's it. So I think this debate, this conversation between secular values and Islamic or Islamist values, goes beyond the specific form of political structuration that happens in each country. It so happens that in Morocco the king is the commander of the faithful. Okay, but what does it change really in the social debate?
But it's in the heart of the separation between.
Oh, it should change, obviously. I mean, the seculars in Morocco, they should. I mean, some of them do claim the total separation of mosque and state. But basically, I think the most common claim is that the king remains the commander of the faithful, but that's basically all what he remains. It becomes a totally powerless figure, and you know what? They keep religion. It's even better. Maybe he might suit the other nervous guys out there if he remains the commander of the faithful. But I don't think it's really relevant to this serious discussion that is happening right now between secular values and Islamic values. This is just the form of the political structure that is to be fought. Somehow although to say that there are two faces, and I'm saying that that's the title of my talk, there are obviously two faces in what is now called the Arab Spring. Number one is taking down the autocratic regimes, and number two, opening this discussion at last, because we weren't able to open it during the dictatorship era. Morocco is still in the first stage. There was no revolution yet in Morocco. And it can take different forms, including a form that would keep the monarchy and would keep the monarchy as Amir al-Mu'mineen or whatnot. But it's still first phase. In second phase, there will be another discussion. And then you asked me a question, about Majlis al-Ulama. So Majlis al-Ulama is the official body of Islamic scholars in Morocco. And since the king is the commander of the faithful, they are under the authority of the king, and the direct authority of the king. And yesterday, I'm not sure of the circumstances, but and as all the bodies of ulama, they receive questions and they have to give religiously based answers. That's their job. And so the Council on Human Rights, for some reason that I don't know, send that question to the Majlis al-Ulama, to the body of religious scholars. And the question was, what does religion say about apostasy, about apostates, about people who would just claim openly that they are atheists? And I mean, they were totally trapped because they had to answer in accordance with their own references. And their own references, I mean, at least given the Islamic school of thought that they follow, which is an orthodox one, the Sunni Malikite rite, that's the official creed of Morocco. It so happens that in the Sunni Malikite rite, well, you have to kill apostates. So that's what they said. Does it mean that apostates will be killed in Morocco? Of course not. Or I hope so. I hope not. I don't think they will do that. It's just that this body was trapped because they were asked the question, and there was no way they would give any other answer than this one. That's the whole problem of fatwa, of all the people who create fatwas, is that they just can't help answering any question. I think that to avoid a lot of crazy and ridiculous fatwas, Mukhtar here knows them very well, it's very simple to avoid saying foolish things. The solution is just to refuse to answer some questions. That's it. But the people who produce fatwas all over the Arab world, that's my theory, they don't do that just out of the willingness to diffuse religious knowledge. They also do that from a position of power. It's because they have the knowledge, and the knowledge is the tool for power. So starting from that paradigm, you cannot say, I don't know. Because if you say, I don't know, you admit that you're powerless. And therefore, you must have an answer to every question that is asked, even the most foolish ones. And this ends up with fatwas like the one in Morocco saying, apostates should be hanged, but you have like crazy stuff out there. And in Free Arab, there's a section called the Fatwa Show. that actually picks the craziest fatwas around, and we use the real texts of them. I mean, that's a pretty funny thing. If we want, I could play one later. And what we do is that's part of the job that we do, is that we take fatwas, the most absurd ones, and we don't change a comma or a word to what fatwa producers say. We just have two actors playing them out, and I can tell you it's hilarious, because the arguments are absolutely incredible. The last one we uploaded was called Contact Lenses, and that was some Wahhabi cleric, it was an official cleric from Saudi Arabia, saying that contact lenses were bad for Muslims and forbidden because they give you the eyes of an animal, rabbit eyes, and well, disguising oneself is forbidden by Islam, and therefore contact lenses are forbidden. Then you have many more like that.
Yes, you'll forgive me if I'm a bit melodramatic here, but I think in some ways you invite a certain melodrama. As I was listening to your talk, perhaps, as I was listening to your talk, I kept thinking of the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror in particular. And the reason that I thought about this is because I think it's salutary to remember that heads were cut off in the name of ideas such as fraternity, égalité, and liberté, not quite in that order. And so, keeping in mind, especially what Judith had to say, I just don't feel that there's really in your presentation, as I understand it, really something that will convince someone, and these are not all Islamists in Morocco or Egypt or Tunisia, who really feels that the ideas of individual liberty and freedom of choice are Trojan horses for an authoritarian project to reform society in ways that they just cannot relate to.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What's the question?
Can I, because I have a similar question, it's just probably simpler.
I'm happy to answer it, it's just I really didn't answer.
Because my name is Raja Irama, I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the center, but my question is going to be an analog to Jeremy's question about non-academic form. And basically, how you say that you want to mobilize people on the spirit of democracy, which you define as individual freedom, right? And you give a few examples of what you mean by individual freedom, basically drinking wine and having sex and things like that. Now, I ask you a question. How are you going to convince people that this idea of individual freedom is worth fighting for, if not dying for? Why is it interesting? Not to say good.
It's funny because that's a recurrent Islamist argument. Oh, really? The only thing you want is to have people drink in the streets and have sex everywhere? Is that your society project? Well, yeah, I mean, it's easily dismissed if you phrase it that way. But phrase it in terms of individual freedoms. Phrase it in terms of freedom of thought. Phrase it in terms of freedom of belief. Phrase it in terms of freedom of creation. Phrase it in terms of the freedom to produce art, to create art that makes society evolve. Freedom in terms of freedom of speech, etc. So suddenly when you use that terms, it sounds less trivial, I believe. Because it's not just trivial. And how would I convince the people? Well, very simply by telling them, hey, what are you doing in your everyday life already? You're doing these things. Do you have an idea of how many clandestine abortions happen every day in Morocco? 1,200 per day. So what does that mean? It means that because we have a set of laws that is inspired by a system of belief that is not applied by the society, we are criminalizing a large part of the society and pushing 1,200 women every day to do clandestine abortions just to conform to this idea that is supposedly what defines us.
But what does individual freedom have to do with this? Is a specific problem of abortion and law.
No, but it has everything to do with it, because if you strip the legislation out of religious references, then there is no obstacle anymore to legalize abortion.
Well, not in the USA, obviously. The secular.
Is it not legal, abortion, in the US?
In all the states?
I think it is.
Yeah,
Or maybe there are a couple of states where it's
A
not.
lot of states are restricted.
So is it the majority of the states in the US?
It's not against the law because of Roe v. Wade. It's just that the states have put impediments in the way of carrying it out.
So it's a legal problem.
It's a legal problem that is deeply rooted in religion. I mean, you want to have to admit that.
Well, an Islamist might counter-argue and tell you this is precisely individual freedom that is causing these abortions to take place.
No, it's not individual freedoms.
An Islamist could argue that.
Well, I would counter him by saying, no, my friend, you're wrong, because it is not freedom. It is breaking the law. It's not these persons who are having illegal sex and ending having abortions in very dangerous conditions because it's against the law. When they are having this sexual relationship, they're not exercising individual freedoms. They're exercising their humanity. That's it. Because you cannot tell them, don't have sex, all of you. So to be consistent with what we think you should be. That's what society does. People are not practicing individual freedoms. They are practicing human needs. And because it's not a freedom, it ends up in a tragic way. That's the point. So, sure, it's pretty trivial, freedom to drink and have sex, that's all. No, sir. It's the freedom to exert your humanity. It's the freedom to be a human being that is like every other human beings in the planet and exercise your basic needs and exercise your basic need to just to be free in your mind. That's it. That's what I would tell them. And I would not tell that to Islamists. I would tell that to those who have other ideas, and I would tell them it's fine. It's okay for everyone to be religion abiding, but it's okay to not be as well. And it should be a right to not be. Just it is a right to be. And by the way, sir, you named the French Revolution. I'm totally opposed to the French conception that consists in forbidding the hijab or the niqab or whatever. This is not secularism for me. It's a deviation of secularism. Because the very spirit of secularism, that's how I understand it at least, is the freedom to exercise religion if you want or not exercise it. So when it ends up as a set of laws that forbids you from being religious, that's a violation. That's obviously something bad. This is not what I mean by secularism. What I mean by secularism is a set of laws that just basically institutionalizes freedom as the one principle that is behind the legislation and the constitution. And then the individuals are free to use these freedoms as they see fit. What happens now is that people practice their humanity, and that makes them against the law. So you have thousands of illegal and dangerous situations happening every day. In Libya, alcohol is not a trivial thing, sir, because in Libya you have something like 3,000 people dying. I'm not sure if it's every month or every year. I think it's, well, there would be a lot every month. Out of drinking bucha. Bucha is the local eau de vie that is like alcohol that is, it's basically the prohibition system. Alcohol is very expensive because it's prohibited, because it's officially forbidden. And then what you have is that mafias. And this is a story in French and a story in Arabic, by the way, written by a Libyan journalist, that explains that since the revolution there were some gunfights in some neighborhoods where contraband, well, smuggled alcohol is sold between religious militias and between the people who are behind, between the alcohol smuggling mafias. And what makes them mafias is the fact that it's a huge market. And what makes it a huge market? It's the demand, it's the need, it's the fact that people are ready to pay a lot of money to drink. You can take it from the trivial side, you can take it as, okay, it happens already, and it creates mafias. So what are we going to do? Continue on prohibition? Didn't give such good results in the US, to my knowledge. It's exactly the same thing in the Arab world. There's absolutely no difference. Etc., etc. And I could talk about atheism, and I could talk about freedom of speech, and I could talk about freedom of thought, and I could talk about these two bloggers in Tunisia who openly claimed their atheism and who were jailed for that, and I could talk about lots of things like that who are far from trivial, and who do not concern only the elite. Because these 1,200 women who have clandestine abortions every day in Morocco, I can tell you that they're not part of the elite. The elite goes to abort in private clinics and private hospitals and goes abroad. These are the people. Who drinks alcohol in Morocco? Not the majority is not drinking Johnny Walker on the rocks. The majority is drinking Stork that's severe in Morocco. That is very cheap, and it's happening. And the majority of bars in Morocco are outside of factories. So the blue-collar people go there and get wasted. It's nothing that I encourage, of course. It's just something that is done already. So let's just acknowledge it and maybe think of a legal and social system that would allow people to continue to live.
thank you for the talk. My name is Amin Tais. I'm a PhD student doing Islamic studies. I find your vision and your point on hypocrisy to be a central one. It's an important one. The hypocrisy between the social norms that are expected of people and what people actually do in reality. I think it's an excellent point. I would just push further with the notion of religion, because it seems to me that if there's a central element in what you said about hypocrisy is just guilt, religious guilt.
Yeah.
So people will actually do these things, but they're not only hiding from the authorities in terms of legal ramifications. They're also guilty, thinking that this is actually what they're supposed to be doing in the eyes of God.
Right.
And so I think this is an important element. I don't think it's an element to just push aside and dismiss. I think it's an important element because I think an important part of this whole discussion is to really engage religion in terms of highlighting the human element in religion. Not to dismiss the divine part, but to take that power away from the managers of the sacred, who speak as if the religious texts are actually clear and present their opinions about what these religious texts are supposed to say as facts, to representing what God wants. And I think that is a psychological element that creates a lot of tension within society because of that element of guilt that you talked about. So I think a project from a political project of secularism in this context in which we live, or in which these countries live, must take in consideration that there has to be a serious discussion about religion, what it means, who speaks in the name of religion, and how it's relative, how it's not as presented by the Islamists as divine laws, but rather as human laws trying to interpret the divine. Whether you believe in the divine or not is a different question. But for the majority of people, the average person on the street, they don't make that difference. And the more people are aware that there's a power structure of the ulama or whomever it is that actually presenting their views as the will of God, then we're still going to have that problem where Islamists will always have the upper hand, and in the society.
I of course do not disagree with what you said before. We're obviously on the same page here, except one thing. They are different, and it's basically what I answered to Paul. I told him that okay, insisting on the human part of religion is definitely something that is needed, and it is needed in this effort to acknowledge the secularity, if I might say, that already governs Arab society. But it's just a part of the equation. I don't think it's the whole equation, because my problem with that being the only, a lot of people would say that this is the way. We should not preach secularism as an aggressive thing, emphasizing on freedoms to have sex and things like that. But we should say, oh, religion is not what you think it is. It's more liberal than what you think it is. The problem, I think, when you engage in that is that it's a never-ending discussion. Because you will always find someone from the other side who will tell you, you didn't understand. I understand better than you. Or what? What are your references? I have other references. That's fine. Let's engage. Oh, you're quoting Ibn Rushd. I will pull out Al-Ghazali, and then it never ends. So I think, of course, this is good to push. It's good to show that religion is not only what Islamists say it is, but I think it's almost also what Islamists say it is. It's a lot of different things. It's a topic that will be never closed, and just as with every other religion, by the way. Except in the West, where more or less secularism is the defining paradigm, it is a discussion between the men of the art, between religious scholars, and it's what the French call le sexe des hommes. They're still debating it, and I guess they will continue debating it till the end of time. It participates to the effort of changing society towards more openness and towards more freedom. But I think focusing on this as the one relevant way is a mistake, because we trap ourselves in a paradigm that consists in saying life is defined by religion. It's just that it's not the religion you think, it's another type of religion. But then, you know what? Who wins at the end? The one who has political power. The one who prevails, the one who has the gun. That's why I think it is crucial to step out of this discussion and say, hey, I have another paradigm. It's called human rights.
But what I'm pushing for is actually to say that there is no such thing as true religion. Not entering in debates in terms of what is the true religion that Paul was looking for. The good religion versus the bad religion. Actually, there is no such thing as good religion or bad religion. And I think the more that is disseminated, the more the human aspect is irrelevant, is actually appearing to people. I think I agree with you. So it's not that you want to get into a religious discussion. It's more like, let's open that field so that when you talk about secularism, when you talk about these freedoms, it actually, you don't have to deal with that guilt aspect as much anymore.
Of course. We should open that field. It should be a multi-level battle and campaign. This is one of the fields. My only point is that it should not be the only one. I guess that's not what you're saying, but a lot of people are saying that. They are saying that promoting secularism as a set of values that is self-sufficient is a mistake in the Arab world. It should be done in the name of religion, and the good way to do it is to show that religion is a tolerant one. I don't think so. I think that this is a way among other ways, but as though that cornering ourselves in only this, that's not what you're saying, but a lot of people are saying that, is a mistake. Because ultimately, the interpretation that will prevail is the one made by the guy who has the gun. And those are Islamists for now.
But the guilt?
The guilt will be worked out. It's a matter of generations. Just 30 years ago, women did not feel guilty walking around in miniskirts in the Arab world. My mother, I have pictures of my mother wearing miniskirts. I mean, if she wore the same thing today, God forbid, in the street, what would happen? Watch the Egyptian movies in the 60s. Did people feel guilty doing that? I don't think so. You know, these things change pretty quickly. It takes one generation. Guilt will be worked out.
Bogdan Tereshenko, graduate school of foreign service. Thank you for such a stimulating talk. I really admire what you're doing, and I think it's wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And my question, I guess, kind of touches on the anecdote you related about Paul, and I'm wondering to what extent you perceive support or lack thereof from the West and from the supposed, bastions of secularism and human rights and democracy, because there is a sense in which I think a lot of at least from what I'm following, a lot of people in the Arab societies who share some of your views or preferences feel that at least the U.S. foreign policy favors the Islamist currents, and that there is a general preference to have these so-called good Islamists as a bulwark against this terrorists or whatever, and so there is, tacit, if not overt, support for the Turkish government, despite its obviously abysmal human rights record, and there just doesn't seem to be the kind of support for the secularist current from the West that we see nowhere near what we see from, say, Saudi Arabia and other countries of the Gulf for the Islamists. And do you think that's a problem, or it just doesn't matter?
I'm not sure about that. I think it's definitely not the most important thing, because this dynamic has to be a domestic dynamic, otherwise it's not relevant. So whatever the international response to this debate, it's definitely not the most important part of it. It's one additional thing. Now we can talk about it. I guess that foreign policies are built upon interests, and interests of the U.S. are to preserve their economic or geostrategic or whatnot. I mean, I'm not an expert of these things, but I guess it's just common sense. And I had a class in Sciences Po. It was called Culture de la Guerre, Guerre de Culture. And by Professor Hassan Salami, some of you might know, is a pretty famous professor of international relations. He was culture minister of Lebanon and so forth. And Professor Salami told us one thing. He said, you know what? Foreign policies of Western countries are basically derived from the intellectual debate that grows in the country regarding the topic we're talking about. And he explained to us how the French foreign policy was mainly derived from Sciences Po, CNRS, and the collection of individuals that were providing the intellectual reading tools to politicians who end up developing such or such doctrine. It so happens that in the US, and I'm finding that out, I didn't know, this is something pretty recent that I discovered recently, specifically since we launched Free Airs, that the debate here about the Arab world is totally dominated by an essentialist vision, which is pretty much left of what an Arab person should be. Edward Said is the prophet, and it's basically let's decipher the Arab angry man, because the Arab has to be an angry man, right? So, and then you got a whole knowledge system that developed around this idea of explaining why the angry man is angry. And then many things are derived from this intellectual paradigm, among which the fact that Islam is just essential to the being of the Arab person. So, what, secularism is not relevant. I mean, sure, there are some crazy individuals out there, but come on, let's do some efficient foreign policy. And to do that, we should just dismiss what is not relevant. What is relevant is the discussion about how to contain the violent ones by pushing the discourse of a peaceful religion, which sometimes get to some level of hypocrisy that is just unbearable, like supporting Saudi Arabia against religious extremism. I mean, what a joke, if you think about it, right? I remember this discussion I had with the former U.S. ambassador in Egypt, and it was before I created the site Free Arabs, and I was basically pitching the idea, because the guy is not as a member, I won't name anyone, but it happens that he's a Democrat. And I was explaining what I explained to you, basically, and this man was a Democrat, so I was expecting some understanding of what I was saying. I was astonished because he was like, "Oh, you know what? You're a racist." I said, "Excuse me, I'm the Ahmed here. How can you accuse me of being racist towards my own people? I mean, I've lived with, and I'm not self-hating, I can tell you. All my life has been focused on trying to understand my environment and to explain it and to produce something relevant and meaningful for it. But it was so disruptive to the main paradigm that defines the Arab man essentially, that the only way to dismiss me was to accuse me of being a racist." Funny, right? It's all about knowledge production. And knowledge production derives from, I don't know, historical happenings that end up creating some circles to the exclusion of some other circles in the intellectual sphere that end up developing or inspiring foreign policies in this or that Western country. That's my answer.
One more question.
Yes, sir.
I'm Jamal Maui. I'm originally Moroccan. I left Morocco 3 years ago. So I'm 30. Over 30 actually. So it's really a pleasure to see someone like yourself doing what you're doing, being a breakthrough yourself, Jamali, and a few other people in the Moroccan society, policing and freedom of press, if you will. At least a breakthrough within that area. So my question to you has to do with two things, which has leadership, and then the other one is education, because it seems to me there is some, after the hasn't, and I'm speaking again about Morocco, but it's true throughout the Arab world, the dictators who were in place made sure that there is no leadership, if you will. So hence, the Islamists were the only ones underground gathering and organizing. So where does the leadership come from nowadays within the Arab world? Is it an internal leadership, or is because I see only mostly, and again, just because I'm here, I'm not there, I see voices coming from outside. Tariq Ramadan, kind of speaking, has his own views, and a few others.
They are extremely well organized.
So, exactly. So, and then, but within the Arab society itself, there's a lack of education is a main, because to enlighten people, to make sure people understand what secularism, what it means, and it doesn't mean that, I am against you because of your religion. There has to be a component of education, and education in the Arab world, specifically in Morocco, is dismal. So there's a lot of people who are, basically 50% of people are analphabets, they close to. So to me, that's a major component, at least as someone who's looking from outside in, because in order to get people to get to a point where they can understand the difference and enlightenment, they have to have some level of education. And the level of education in the countries right now is very, very extremely bad. And that has to do also with the fact that the language issue, the barriers that they have, You have kids who are taught in French or Arabic, if you will, in Morocco, which to me they're both foreign languages, because as soon as the child leaves the school, they're speaking Darija, which is the local language. They speak it at home, they speak it in the streets, so they don't practice it. So there's the language barrier of knowledge is not there. So the kids are struggling understanding the language first before they can understand the concept. So there is that element, if you will, in which the Islamists themselves would counter with the fact that the language Arabic is a Quran language. Therefore, over my dead body, you're not going to change the structure of the language. So again, to me, that's one component, because in order to enlighten the society, there has to be some level of education. You're a journalist, average circulation of newspapers and magazines at 320,000, if that's the last numbers I know. So number of books being published, not much. Number of scientific patents from the Arab world, hardly existent. So there is a level of lack of education within the society. In order to get to that level, to a point where you can start talking secularism and talking enlightening people, there has to be some level of understanding of what we're talking about. Because the societies themselves, the individual, even in the day-to-day language, is based on religion. Even the way people speak, they speak from it's tied to religion, so there is no separation, if you will, on the day-to-day dealing with. So I just want to get your point on where leadership is, where is the level of education, what is going on, because without those elements, it's...
I totally agree. It's a multi-dimensional effort, obviously, and education is, I would say, the most fundamental component of this social change dynamics that has to happen in order to free Arab societies of their own ghosts and complexes. You're absolutely right, education. But education is not just school.
No, exactly.
It's also mass media, it's also public discourse, and we should not dismiss too easily social media and the internet, because it's more and more relevant. Now it might look as a gadget, but maybe in one generation it will be the main tool for spreading knowledge around. And so it's a multi-dimensional effort for sure. And the one little thing in which I disagree with you, and it's really small because I agree with most of what you said, is that as long as people are not educated, we should not raise these questions. I think that about individual freedoms, I think that it's part of it. It should be addressed head on, and the sooner the better. But then, of course, I'm not saying that that's the only thing to do. That's, of course, that's the number one reaction of Islamists. Oh, that's all what you want? No, that's not all I want, sir. We want a lot of things. We want democracy, we want accountability, we want free press, we want free justice, we want a better education, we want an improvement of the economic condition, and also, incidentally, we want to be free to have sex and to drink a beer. So, of course, then everyone focuses on that because that's the one divisive question, but it's obviously not the main concern. So these things, I think, they should be individual freedoms, basically. They should be taught. It should be part of the effort from scratch, from the beginning. We should not wait until people are ready, because how do you assess that people are ready or not? People are already ready since the society is practicing these things, so it's just about time to explain it anytime. But then, of course, changing the educational system and making it more fit and adapted to the situation is an extremely important thing, and it goes through the language. Darija, which is the colloquial language, well, that's my personal theory, and it's deep provocative by a lot of people as well about language. I think that Moroccan language, Egyptian language, Syrian language are to classical Arabic what French, Italian, and Spanish are to Latin. There is a matrix.
Arabic is what Latin was.
Exactly. There is a matrix that is Arabic, but no one speaks it on an everyday basis. We understand Egyptian Arabic a lot because they have this cultural imperialism. Egyptian shows are everywhere, so we're supposed also to understand Egyptian, but that's not standard Arabic, it's Egyptian, right? And there is no such thing as standard Arabic is promoted on the channels like Al Jazeera, so it's gaining some ground since a few years where the phenomenon of satellite channels has grown. But that's not the natural language of Arabs, and this is a problem since people are taught in a language that is not theirs. So I think that one of the most important things to do is to acknowledge the fact that there is such a thing as Moroccan language, and then Egyptian language, and then Syrian language. Just an anecdote about that. I was in Amman a few years ago. I was giving a talk there, and I was talking about this. And then I was in a panel, and there was this fellow panelist. He was Egyptian, the editor-in-chief of a newspaper. I'm not sure which one it is. I think I must have been or something like that. Anyway, and I was saying what I was saying. And then he was like, and before he spoke, like a couple of persons like they stood up and they left angrily the place because I was undermining Arab unity or whatnot. And he said something very angry and they left the room. But he didn't. He just said, no, I don't agree. It's not a language in Morocco. Come on, it's Arabic. You just have a different accent. Just, for example, we say ga, you say ja, but that's it. It's the same language. I said, oh, really? Is it? Okay, let me do a test. And I said, I guess there are some Arabic speakers in the room, so I'm going to do this test now for those of you who speak Arabic. قلت لها طب حالك كنت تقول ليه تقول لها كنت نهضر كل نهار في الحمام مع الدراري ومع صحابي وختي وخالتي وما فهمتش حاجه ماشي تقول لك. He was like, what? And then some friends in the public who were English had speakerphones. They told me that, and they were hearing the translation. They told me that when I said that, translators just stopped talking. No one understood. I said, and then he said, no, he said, you're not speaking Moroccan. Come on, you're speaking Berber. I said, no, sir. I was speaking Moroccan language. And what I was saying is, أنا أتكلم الآن كما أتكلم كل يوم مع زوجتي وأصدقائي وزملائي في العمل وأنت لا تفهم شيئا مما أقول. أليس كذلك؟ And he goes, no, you didn't just say that. That's exactly what I said. See how different it is? So I think it's pretty obvious, and not recognizing that is part of the delusion that cripples the Arab. And about Arab unity, I think the European Union is pretty more efficient than the Arab Union, and still they have no problem in having like 12 different languages. And we have supposedly one language, and the Arab Union is not really something tangible. So it's part of it. And we should start by acknowledging that we have different languages, because the spread of knowledge starts by understanding what the teacher tells you. And this starts by officializing local languages as languages and not dialects. It's part of it. It's a multidimensional thing.
This will have to be, we run out of time. I'm sorry, but please feel free to talk to Ahmed after this. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for this very good.